Some kings were not satisfied with thrones of marble and crowns of gold. Their obsessions stretched far beyond the boundaries of reason, twisting empires into reflections of their desires. Imagine a ruler who believed that immortality could be distilled into liquid mercury, another who demanded his chambers be lined with mirrors so that his image multiplied into infinity, as though he feared fading into a single reflection. These obsessions, strange as they may sound, were not harmless quirks. They were forces that shaped the destiny of entire nations, pulling armies, treasuries, and human lives into the whirlpool of one mind's fixation. In the dim halls of forgotten palaces, relics still whisper of these peculiar fixations. A goblet laced with poisons meant to test endurance, walls painted only in the color red to ward off imaginary spirits, labyrinthine gardens cultivated not for beauty but for secrecy. Each eccentricity was a fragment of the ruler's psyche, carved into stone and ritual, commanding not only courtiers, but the course of history itself. The deeper you peer into these patterns, the more the line between power and madness blurs, as if obsession was the true scepter in a king's hand. Consider the one who could not bear to touch iron, forcing his soldiers to carry weapons plated in bronze long after steel had conquered battlefields. Or the monarch who insisted that every candle in his palace burn with blue flame, achieved by mixing salts into wax at enormous cost. These were not simple indulgences, they became mandates, reshaping economies, altering traditions, rewriting the very rhythm of life in the kingdom. To serve such a king was to enter a dreamlike world where his obsession became law, and reality bent accordingly. What drove them to such extremes? Was it fear of death, the paranoia of betrayal, or the crushing weight of solitude at the top of a throne? Historians speak of these men as though their desires were curiosities, yet standing within their courts must have felt like living in a hallucination. Imagine walking corridors where whispers were forbidden, where every step was measured to avoid invisible patterns, where servants trembled not from cruelty, but from the burden of upholding an irrational ritual. One slip, one deviation, and the illusion collapsed, provoking a rage that could unravel lives. These kings remind us that power magnifies the hidden corners of the mind. What might be dismissed as a harmless superstition in common folk becomes a kingdom-wide decree when it emerges from a sovereign. The obsession is no longer private, it radiates, consuming resources, bending architecture, guiding politics. It lingers in ruins, in chronicles, in the faint echo of decisions whose logic has long dissolved, leaving only the mesmerizing strangeness behind. And this is only the beginning. For as strange as these examples seem, the stories yet to come will reveal even darker spirals of compulsion, where the boundary between ritual and nightmare disappears entirely. The path winds deeper, and the kings ahead carry obsessions so bizarre, so consuming, that their very names became legends whispered in awe and disbelief. In the chronicles of forgotten realms, one king's obsession with silence grew so overwhelming that his palace became a vast mausoleum of stillness. Carpets muffled every footstep, fountains were drained to prevent the sound of flowing water, and servants padded about in shoes wrapped with cloth. Musicians were banished, bells melted down, even the chirping of birds was considered an intrusion upon his carefully constructed void. To those within, it was as though they had entered the afterlife, a world stripped of echoes, where even the beating of their hearts seemed too loud. His fixation was not merely on peace, but on erasing the very concept of sound, as if by silencing the world he could silence the constant fear inside his mind. In another empire, a ruler's fascination with scent reshaped an entire economy. He believed that the essence of divinity could be captured in perfumes so potent they could ward off death itself. Fields that once grew wheat were transformed into vast gardens of jasmine, roses, and exotic spices imported from distant lands. Tax collectors demanded not coin but petals, and entire villages were pressed into harvesting blossoms until their hands bled. At court, the king moved through halls veiled with clouds of fragrance so thick that visitors often fainted. To breathe in his presence was to drown in sweetness, and yet to him it was never enough. The air had to drip with eternity, and so he suffocated his people under the weight of his desire. Then came the monarch who believed shadows carried omens. He forbade the setting sun from touching his body, surrounding himself with an army of torchbearers to banish the dark. His palaces were lit as though midday never ended, consuming forests worth of wood each year. The night sky became his enemy, and he ordered astrologers to rewrite the heavens so that stars no longer predicted doom but sang of endless triumphs. The kingdom itself revolved around his fear of absence, his refusal to let darkness claim even a corner of his realm. But in illuminating every space, he plunged his people into exhaustion, their lives dictated by the ceaseless burning of fire. Another tale speaks of a sovereign obsessed with numbers, who believed the universe itself could be bent if every act adhered to sacred patterns. He counted each breath before issuing decrees, demanded that banquets serve dishes in multiples of 7, and ordered that streets in the capital be rebuilt to align with numerical grids only he understood. Citizens were punished if their names held the wrong number of letters, marriages annulled if dates did not add up to his sacred figures. The city became a living puzzle, an endless labyrinth of calculations carved into stone, a monument not to governance but to an abstract compulsion. What links these rulers is not simply strangeness, but the transformation of obsession into destiny. Their courts became distorted mirrors of their minds, places where reality warped into dream, where power was measured not by armies or wealth, but by the intensity of one individual's fixation. To live under such reigns was to inhabit another's hallucination, a theater where every gesture and object was a prop in the grand performance of a single mind. And yet, the further we peer into these stories, the more we recognize a chilling pattern. Each obsession, no matter how irrational, bore a secret logic. In silence, the fear of dissent. In perfume, the hunger for permanence. In firelight, the denial of mortality. In numbers, the desire to impose order upon chaos. These were not random whims, but reflections of deeper truths, magnified until they swallowed kingdoms whole. And as the chronicles unfold, stranger obsessions still wait ahead, pressing against the edges of imagination, daring us to question where sanity ends and sovereignty begins. There was once a ruler who believed that mirrors held fragments of the soul. Every corridor of his palace shimmered with polished glass. Every chamber multiplied his image into countless reflections. Visitors spoke of vertigo as they walked through those endless halls, faces refracted into infinity, unable to tell where the king truly stood. He believed that by surrounding himself with reflections, he could trap death itself, confusing the reaper among infinite copies. The effect was mesmerizing and suffocating at once, as though the palace itself were a crystal maze that swallowed all who entered. Yet behind the brilliance lay a deeper truth. The king could not stand the sight of others, only his own endless gaze. In another realm, far across the seas, a monarch was consumed by an obsession with gold, not merely as wealth, but as a living essence. He demanded that his food be gilded, his robes stitched with molten threads, and even his armor plated with thin sheets that glistened like sunlight. The kingdom's treasuries emptied, but his hunger only grew. He declared that the skin of his servants be dusted with golden powder before entering his presence, so that every movement shimmered. The air itself sparkled, as if the world had been transfigured into an endless dawn. Yet the obsession corroded the foundations of his realm, for while he shone brighter than any sovereign before, his people starved in the shadows of his glittering fantasy. Elsewhere, a different sovereign surrendered himself to the tides. Obsessed with the sea, he relocated his entire court to floating palaces built on rafts bound together, drifting across lagoons and estuaries. Ministers delivered decrees while the floor rocked beneath their feet. Soldiers trained on swaying decks, and feasts were interrupted by storms that tossed goblets into the waves. To him, the sea was eternity, an untamed mirror of his power. Yet his empire drowned slowly, industries abandoned, crops left untended as the royal court pursued an endless voyage. Those who followed him lived in a dream of water, until they no longer remembered the solidity of earth beneath their feet. Not all obsessions were so visible. Some kings cloaked their fixations beneath layers of ritual. One sovereign grew convinced that his dreams were messages from the divine, and so he surrounded himself with scribes who documented every flicker of sleep. Each night's visions became law, guiding battles, reshaping alliances, rewriting codes of justice. One evening he dreamt of fire, and entire villages were ordered burned. Another night brought visions of snakes, and a new cult was founded in their image. His realm was sculpted by the chaos of dreams, each decree drifting further from reality until his subjects moved as if inside another man's restless sleep. Yet perhaps the most haunting figure was the king who distrusted death itself. He commissioned mausoleums in every city, vast tombs prepared not only for himself, but for every possibility of his demise. Some filled with statues, others lined with rivers of quicksilver, still more designed to collapse upon intruders. He moved between these tombs as one might visit country estates, rehearsing eternity as though it were a ceremony. For his people, life became a prolonged funeral procession, every festival and tax redirected toward the construction of yet another shrine to a king who refused to die. These obsessions, though bizarre, were not simply madness. They were anchors of meaning in the isolation of power, attempts to ward off the inevitabilities of time, betrayal, and mortality. And yet, the greater their intensity, the more they unmoored entire empires. Each fixation spread like a ripple, reshaping landscapes, rewriting customs, echoing across generations. To read of them now is to wander through a dream that has not entirely ended, for traces of their compulsion still linger in ruined halls, abandoned rituals, and legends whispered as warnings. The journey is far from finished, for hidden among the chronicles are rulers whose fixations grew so monstrous, so consuming, that they devoured not only their kingdoms, but their very identities, dissolving into the obsessions they once commanded. The path ahead leads deeper into that darkness. Among the strangest chronicles lies the tale of a monarch who sought to master the passage of time itself. Convinced that the ticking of clocks hastened his death, he ordered every timepiece in his realm destroyed. Sundials were smashed, water clocks drained, and hourglasses buried beneath temple floors. In their place, he built halls of eternal twilight, where torches burned dimly, and windows were veiled with heavy curtains, erasing the sun's advance. Days bled into nights, months dissolved into seasons, until his court no longer remembered the rhythm of years. He believed that by severing himself from time, he could step outside of mortality, yet the absence of its measure only deepened the illusion. His people lived in timelessness, trapped in the kingdom where no moment could be claimed as past or future, only an endless present stretched thin as glass. Another sovereign turned inward, consumed not by hours but by the body itself. His obsession with health bordered on mania. He demanded every meal be tasted for poison, every drink filtered through layers of silver mesh, every garment inspected for threads that might irritate his skin. Physicians surrounded him day and night, their whispers a constant litany of remedies, tinctures, and cures. He collected exotic elixirs from distant lands, consuming them in elaborate rituals meant to preserve youth. His palace became a hospital disguised as a throne room, where courtiers coughed discreetly, fearful of banishment for their ailments. Yet for all his precautions, his fear of illness gnawed deeper than any plague could, until his life itself became the disease he sought to cure. Elsewhere, across deserts and mountains, a ruler sought perfection in architecture. He envisioned a city where every building mirrored the stars, where streets curved in celestial patterns, and where temples aligned with constellations no mortal eye could fully trace. Obsessed with symmetry, he ordered entire districts torn down and rebuilt if even a single measurement faltered. Stonecutters labored until their hands bled, architects collapsed from exhaustion, and still he demanded more. To live in his city was to wander among constellations carved into stone, a cosmic dream made tangible. Yet beneath its beauty lay despair, for the empire bled resources to fuel a vision that consumed generations, leaving behind a glittering skeleton of obsession. There was also the king who adored fire, not as warmth or weapon, but as a living deity. Every night bonfires roared across his realm, consuming forests, fields, and villages, feeding his hunger for flame. He believed that in fire dwelled truth, that the crackle of wood revealed messages from the divine. Priests read the patterns of sparks as if they were scripture, and warriors burned their weapons before battle to receive strength. The night sky glowed with his devotion. Entire landscapes turned to ash in the name of one man's obsession. Yet even as the kingdom blackened, the Fire King smiled, convinced that only through flame could eternity be glimpsed. And still another ruler devoted himself to animals, believing them to be guardians of his soul. Tigers roamed his throne room, lions lay at the foot of his bed, serpents curled around golden pillars. He decreed that trials be judged not by magistrates, but by beasts, releasing the accused into arenas where their fate was decided by tooth and claw. His subjects lived in terror, yet they also whispered of miracles, of moments where the creatures bowed as though recognizing guilt or innocence. His kingdom became a sanctuary of predators, a menagerie of divine judgment, where the roar of beasts replaced the voice of law. Patterns begin to emerge in these stories. Obsessions not only twisted kings, but entire civilizations. The erasure of time, the worship of fire, the devotion to beasts, each reshaped daily existence, embedding strangeness into the very fabric of life. To serve under these rulers was to step into visions too vast to resist, dreams too consuming to escape. And though centuries have passed, their shadows still flicker, as if the obsessions of kings were never buried but linger on, echoing like whispers in forgotten ruins. In one distant kingdom, the ruler's fixation centered not on gold or fire, but on bones. He believed that the essence of power lay within skeletal remains, that each fragment held a memory of strength once lived. He ordered the excavation of burial grounds, demanding that skulls and femurs be polished, catalogued, and displayed in endless corridors of ivory white. His throne itself was carved from the bones of thousands, fused together into a grotesque mosaic of mortality. Courtiers whispered as they walked beneath arches built from ribs, past chandeliers fashioned from vertebrae, through banquet halls where femurs clattered in the draft. He proclaimed that by surrounding himself with death he had conquered it, yet to his subjects the palace was a mausoleum, a place where the living feasted among the dead. Elsewhere, another monarch abandoned the mortal body altogether, obsessed instead with the realm of shadows. He claimed that every shadow was a fragment of the soul escaping, and so he sought to capture them. Walls of his palace were painted black, floors of polished obsidian reflected no light, and servants were forbidden to cast their forms upon his presence. Torchbearers maneuvered constantly to keep his silhouette from appearing, yet he paced the halls in terror, convinced that one slip would sever him from eternity. His court became a theater of darkness, a choreography of lights arranged not to reveal but to erase. And when he died, the chronicles say no shadow fell upon his tomb, as though even the earth itself conspired to grant his obsession eternal form. Another tale recalls a sovereign who worshipped silence, not of the ear, but of thought. He ordered his subjects to erase writing, to banish books, to destroy libraries so that only his words remained. Language itself became a fragile thing, reduced to fragments he alone decreed permissible. Villages that preserved songs or stories were razed, and generations grew without memory. To speak was to risk treason. To write was to commit sacrilege. He imagined that by stripping away history, he could birth a new world, where only his voice remained. But in silencing the past, he created a realm of ghosts, a society that drifted without anchor, where the future itself became uncertain. Far away, across mountains wreathed in mist, lived a king enthralled by the sky. He ordered towers built so high they vanished into clouds, demanding that his court dwell among the heavens. Bridges of rope and stone linked the peaks, where altars burned continuously to honor the sun and stars. Below, valleys emptied as villages were uprooted to fuel this vision of ascension. His courtiers lived in thin air, gasping for breath as the ruler proclaimed himself closer to divinity. Lightning struck often, storms ravaged the heights, yet he refused to descend, convinced that only above the clouds could eternity be touched. To him, the heavens were not unreachable, they were his rightful throne. But strangest of all was the monarch who surrendered himself to color. He decreed that his realm would be painted in a single hue, a vast monochrome kingdom devoted to his chosen shade. Fields were dyed, rivers tinted, even animals marked to blend with his vision. He rotated his obsession through cycles, at times red, at others green or blue, forcing entire populations to repaint their homes, their garments, their temples. His empire became a shifting dreamscape of pigments, a living canvas shaped by his desire. To outsiders, it was bewildering, a land that seemed to breathe in waves of color. But to those within, it was a prison of endless repetition, where the world itself changed not with seasons, but with the moods of one man. These obsessions reveal not only the eccentricities of rulers, but the pliability of those who served them. Empires bent under the weight of hallucinations, entire civilizations reshaped as though reality itself had dissolved into fantasy. In these stories, we glimpse the fragility of human order, how easily it yields to the compulsions of a single mind, how swiftly dreams can harden into monuments. And as the chronicles deepen, darker visions await fixations so consuming that they swallowed even the memory of the kings who bore them, leaving only whispers of obsession in their wake. There was once a sovereign who worshipped glass. He demanded that entire palaces be constructed of translucent walls, roofs, and corridors, so that nothing remained hidden. The sun blazed through crystal ceilings, scattering light in kaleidoscopic shards that dazzled courtiers until their eyes burned. At night, the moon poured silver into chambers where privacy vanished, every gesture visible, every secret dissolved. He proclaimed that transparency was purity, that shadows bred treachery, and so his empire became a realm of exposure, a place where even whispers felt dangerous. Yet the irony was stark. Though he demanded openness from his people, he veiled himself behind veils of smoked glass, a figure visible only as a distorted silhouette, forever watching but never truly seen. In another distant land, a king was enthralled not by sight but by sound. To him, music was the language of the cosmos, and so he decreed that his kingdom must never fall silent. Streets rang with drums day and night, minstrels played ceaselessly, bells tolled with every shift of the wind, markets hummed, temples thundered, and the capital pulsed like a living heart of noise. Sleep became impossible, but dissent disappeared beneath the roar, drowned in endless harmonies. The king believed the melodies guarded his reign, that as long as music filled the air, no rival could rise. Yet beneath the ceaseless songs, his people slipped into delirium, their minds fractured by the weight of sound. The kingdom itself became a vast orchestra tuned to madness, sustained not by harmony but by obsession. Another tale recalls the monarch who placed faith in geometry. He envisioned his empire as a perfect circle, and so he reshaped the land to match. Villages were burned to clear lines, rivers redirected, hills flattened until his map resembled a cosmic wheel. From above, the capital radiated like a mandala, roads stretching outward in flawless symmetry, temples aligned with spokes, markets at measured intervals. He believed that by imposing order upon earth, he would mirror the order of heaven. Yet perfection proved fragile, for nature rebelled storms, washed away his patterns. Rivers reclaimed their courses. Mountains shifted with earthquakes. Still, he built and rebuilt, refusing to yield, as though defiance of nature itself was the truest form of sovereignty. Elsewhere rose a ruler, obsessed with hunger, not for food itself, but for the act of feasting. He demanded banquets at every hour, tables laden with delicacies until the weight of them cracked the floors. Servants staggered beneath towers of roasted meat, oceans of wine, mountains of sugared fruit. The king never ate more than a bite, yet he required abundance so vast it dwarfed entire harvests. To him, the feast was a symbol of dominion, proof that scarcity could never touch his reign. His subjects starved, while he watched the excess rot, rats feasting where men could not. His empire became a monument to appetite, not nourishment but display, a theater of waste that left famine in its wake. But perhaps the most chilling was the sovereign who sought to erase death altogether. He forbade mourning, destroyed graveyards, and ordered that corpses be hidden deep in secret caverns where no citizen might stumble upon decay. Funerals vanished, grief was punished, and the illusion of eternal life suffocated the land. Festivals replaced memorials, laughter forced into faces, while sorrow rotted underground. Yet the truth seeped through. Disease spread unchecked, bodies piled in shadows, and whispers of the forbidden dead haunted the silence. His people walked in denial, as if life itself had become a masquerade staged upon a hollow stage, the darkness beneath threatening always to rise. These rulers were not isolated curiosities. They were reflections of power unbound, of minds that mistook obsession for divinity. Their legacies shimmer in ruins, in fragments of architecture and rumor, in the memory of people who lived within hallucinations made real. And the deeper the chronicles reach, the stranger the visions become, as though history itself bends beneath the weight of kings who dream too vividly, until their dreams consumed the world. One monarch lived in terror of the earth beneath his feet. He believed that the ground itself plotted against him, that roots and soil carried whispers of rebellion. To escape, he commanded that his palace be suspended on colossal stilts, raised high above the plains, so that no touch of earth could reach him. Bridges spanned between towers, entire courts elevated into the sky, supported by forests of timber and stone. From below, the structure appeared as a city floating above the ground, a mirage anchored in air. Yet the higher he climbed, the more he trembled, for storms swayed the foundations and winds howled through the pillars. His fear became his kingdom's burden, as peasants labored endlessly to reinforce the stilts, trapped in a life of ceaseless construction. Elsewhere, a ruler became consumed by the idea of purity. He ordered that no metal touch his body, no leather graze his skin, no tool shape his meals. Instead, he lived surrounded by objects carved from crystal, garments woven of silk and air, food prepared with bare hands upon stone. His courtiers bent themselves to his obsession, breaking tradition after tradition, abandoning weapons, discarding armor, until the army itself faltered. Yet to the king, it was perfection, a realm untainted by craft, untouched by the corruption of industry. His palace gleamed like a shrine of fragile beauty, and when it collapsed, it did so silently, shattering into glittering fragments like the dream it had always been. In another corner of history, a sovereign devoted himself to the wind. He built temples with open roofs so that breezes could pass unhindered, erected colossal towers topped with sails that spun endlessly, declaring the air itself his divine messenger. He wrapped his garments with feathers, slept beneath canopies of rustling leaves, and demanded that decrees be delivered not by heralds but by kites, each one inscribed with laws drifting across the city. The kingdom fluttered with banners, whistled with reeds, and hummed with whispers of air. Yet storms tore through, scattering commands, turning laws into fragments lost in the fields. His obsession dissolved the very structure of rule, transforming government into wind-borne dreams. There was also the king who worshipped stillness. He demanded that lakes remain untouched, that forests remain uncut, that stones never be moved from where they rested. His obsession with preservation paralyzed his empire. Roads crumbled, trade routes vanished beneath weeds, fields went untilled, but he rejoiced in the silence of untouched nature. His subjects starved, yet the monarch walked among overgrown gardens, declaring them eternal sanctuaries. His reign became a monument not to progress, but to stagnation, a frozen tableau where time itself seemed to halt, suffocating under the weight of immobility. Another tale speaks of the monarch who adored masks. He insisted that no face should be revealed, that all who entered his presence wear veils of wood, metal, or cloth. He himself never appeared without layers of disguise, shifting his identity with each passing hour. Courtiers spoke of banquets where hundreds dined together, none knowing who sat beside them, laughter echoing from faceless mouths. Truth dissolved into masquerade, and suspicion grew, for beneath the masks, no one knew who conspired, who served, who betrayed. The kingdom became a theater of shadows, a realm where even the king's true visage faded into myth. All these obsessions, varied and strange, shared one unifying force: the transformation of fear into ritual. Fear of earth, fear of corruption, fear of exposure, fear of change, fear of truth, all magnified by power until they swallowed reality. To live within these kingdoms was to breathe hallucinations, to step daily into the stage of a sovereign's mind. And with each tale, the path into madness grows deeper, leading toward rulers whose fixations were so profound that not even death silenced them. Their legacies persisted like curses, etched into the stones of their abandoned cities, carried in whispers that still unsettle the present. One monarch believed that eternity could be captured in sleep. He withdrew from the world, demanding that his chambers remain in perpetual darkness, draped with layers of velvet to smother even the faintest glow. Physicians dosed him with herbs and opiates, lulling him into endless slumber. Servants recorded his dreams with reverence, interpreting them as revelations, while courtiers bowed before his bed as if it were a throne. He became a sovereign of silence, ruling not with decrees, but with visions half-formed in unconsciousness. Outside his chamber, the kingdom faltered, but inside the king drifted deeper into a dream he never intended to leave. His obsession became a form of abdication, surrendering the world in pursuit of visions only he could see. In another distant realm, a ruler grew entranced by mirrors of water. He ordered canals to be carved through every street, pools built in every courtyard, lakes dredged and widened until the capital glittered with reflections. He believed that truth resided not in flesh but in rippling surfaces, and so he consulted not ministers but the shifting patterns of waves. Decisions were made according to the movement of currents, alliances sealed by watching how reflections trembled in the wind. The city drowned beneath his obsession, commerce sinking under floods, homes consumed by spreading waters. Yet to him it was paradise, a kingdom where every decision flowed like the tide, where the surface of water revealed the secrets of heaven. Elsewhere, chronicles recall a monarch who devoted himself entirely to animals of flight. He dreamed of shedding human form, of soaring above the limits of earth. He demanded wings crafted from silk and bone, ordered towers built to launch his flights, and commanded his servants to leap with him into the air. Many perished, broken against stone, yet he insisted that divinity lay just beyond the fall. Birds were honored as prophets, their movements studied as omens, their feathers woven into robes. His people learned to live in the shadow of wings, forever glancing upward, fearful of the day he might succeed, and abandon them altogether. Another sovereign's obsession was with darkness itself. Unlike others who feared the night, he embraced it wholly, banishing daylight from his realm. Curtains sealed every window, lamps extinguished at dawn, streets lit only by the glow of moonlight and stars. His court thrived in blackness, faces glimpsed only in flicker, whispers louder than sight. Crops withered for lack of sun, yet he proclaimed it a blessing. declaring that shadow revealed truths hidden by the glare of light. His subjects stumbled in perpetual gloom, their lives reduced to outlines and murmurs. To them, the kingdom became a cavern without walls, where time dissolved into indistinguishable hours, and existence itself blurred into a dream. Perhaps the most haunting was the king, whose fixation lay with voices. He collected them obsessively, demanding that scribes transcribe every word spoken in his court. He ordered singers to chant until their throats bled, storytellers to recount tales without end, children to recite their dreams each morning. He kept chambers filled with scrolls of words, stacked until the ceilings groaned, convinced that voices preserved in writing would grant him dominion over memory itself. Yet his hoard became incomprehensible, an ocean of speech that drowned all meaning. His kingdom became a place where silence vanished, where every breath was recorded, and yet no one truly listened. These rulers may seem impossibly distant, but the thread connecting them remains clear. Their fixations became prisons, both for themselves and for their people. Sleep became eternity, water became law, wings became faith, darkness became truth, voices became chains. In each case, the obsessions that promised transcendence instead delivered ruin, weaving hallucinations so vast that they consumed reality itself. The deeper we step into these chronicles, the more we sense that the line between eccentricity and apocalypse is thinner than history admits, and the strangest tales still lie ahead. Among the strangest chronicles is the tale of a monarch obsessed with shadows cast by fire. Unlike the king who feared the dark, this ruler demanded that flames burn in every chamber, not for warmth or light, but for the dance of silhouettes they created. Walls were covered in pale plaster to better capture the shifting forms, and courtiers were ordered to move constantly, their bodies weaving endless patterns of flickering shapes. He believed the shadows were messages, divine whispers written in motion, and he would spend nights tracing their movements until dawn. His empire became a theater of phantoms, a realm where every gesture left an imprint of meaning. Yet, as the fires consumed forests and the air thickened with smoke, the kingdom suffocated under the weight of shadows that revealed nothing. In another land, a sovereign surrendered to stone. He commanded sculptors to carve not statues of gods or heroes, but replicas of his own image in infinite variety, young, old, armored, crowned, asleep, awake. Cities filled with these effigies until streets became corridors of faces, every angle reflecting his likeness. His people could not escape his presence. In markets, in temples, in their very homes, his stone eyes followed. He believed that by multiplying his image, he could resist oblivion, becoming eternal through sheer repetition. Yet as the statues spread, individuality vanished. Citizens began to forget their own names, their own reflections, seeing only the monarch in every form. The realm became a gallery of a single man, a suffocating labyrinth of sameness. Elsewhere, a ruler fell captive to the allure of silence, not of sound, but of movement. He declared that stillness was perfection and commanded that citizens freeze at the toll of bells. Entire markets would halt mid-trade. Streets turned into tableaux of frozen figures, while the king walked among them like a deity moving through statues. Children held their breath. Merchants clutched coins mid-air. Dancers paused with arms raised. To disobey was treason, and so the kingdom pulsed in unnatural rhythms, life interrupted by enforced paralysis. For him, it was ecstasy, an empire paused at his whim, time itself a servant to his desire. Yet to those who lived beneath him, existence became fractured, a series of broken moments strung together by fear. Another tale recalls the monarch who adored labyrinths. Convinced that truth could only be found at the center of complexity, he ordered his cities rebuilt as mazes. Streets twisted into spirals, walls rose without doors, and gardens grew in intricate knots of pathways. Even his palace was an enigma, courtiers wandering for hours before reaching the throne. He alone, held the secret routes, the hidden passages that threaded through confusion. His people lived in perpetual disorientation, never sure if they were lost or simply trapped. To the king, this was perfection, a realm where no enemy could invade, where every step toward him was a riddle. But as the mazes spread, trade collapsed, lives were consumed in wandering, and the kingdom dissolved into bewilderment. Yet stranger still was the sovereign, who craved reflection not of self, but of sound. He filled caverns with polished stone and bronze, creating chambers where every whisper multiplied into thunder. He believed these echoes carried prophecy, messages from beyond, and he spent hours listening to his own voice rebound in endless layers. Priests declared the echoes sacred. Interpreters scribbled their meanings. Armies marched at the command of reverberations. His empire became a chorus of repetition, a place where no word died but lingered, layered upon itself until clarity vanished. In time, his subjects could no longer distinguish truth from its reflection, drowning in echoes that said nothing new. These rulers remind us how obsession warps the fabric of reality. Shadows mistaken for truth, statues for immortality, stillness for control, labyrinths for order, echoes for wisdom. Each fixation promised transcendence yet delivered distortion, bending entire civilizations into illusions. The further these chronicles carry us, the more they resemble not history but dreams, dreams that did not end with the dreamer's death, but linger still, haunting ruins, lingering in rituals, etched into memory as though obsession itself refuses to die. One sovereign surrendered himself entirely to the idea of weight. He believed that gravity was not a force, but a spirit pressing down upon the earth, and he sought to master it. In his halls, ceilings were hung with massive stones suspended by chains, swaying above courtiers as they bowed. He ordered that servants carry iron burdens strapped to their backs, claiming that endurance of weight purified the soul. Even his throne was a block of lead, so heavy that it could not be moved, a monument to his fixation. The kingdom groaned under his obsession, citizens collapsing under endless loads, while the king smiled, convinced that by bearing weight, his people would grow strong enough to defy death itself. Elsewhere lived a monarch, fascinated by circles. He believed that all imperfections could be erased through endless rotation, and so he demanded that life itself revolve. His cities were redesigned into spirals, markets arranged in wheels, and every ritual required movement in arcs. Courtiers spun endlessly as they addressed him. Servants turned in loops as they delivered meals, and children were taught to walk only in curves. The kingdom became dizzy, its people staggering through lives dictated by circular paths. Yet to the king, it was divine order, the endless return, the eternal cycle, the promise that nothing truly ended. In his realm, even despair repeated itself, round and round until all sense of progress dissolved. Another ruler lost himself in soundless vibration. He demanded that giant drums be built, not to be struck but to hum with the faintest tremors of the earth. These resonances filled his palace, a constant background thrum that seemed to seep into the bones of all who entered. He proclaimed that the vibrations connected him to the pulse of the cosmos, that through them he could hear the heart of creation itself. Courtiers swayed unconsciously as they stood before him, lulled by rhythms no ear could fully perceive. The empire itself seemed to shiver, as though the land had become a living instrument tuned to the madness of one man's obsession. In a distant desert kingdom, a sovereign turned his gaze skyward and fell captive to stars. He ordered that astronomers record not only constellations, but every flicker of light, every falling star, every faint shimmer. Towers crowned with bronze mirrors stretched into the heavens, and the night became more important than the day. Decrees were signed only beneath specific constellations. Armies marched according to the phases of the moon, marriages permitted only under auspicious alignments. The kingdom's rhythm beat not with seasons but with the heavens above, leaving fields unplanted and harvests neglected. To him, this was not ruin but revelation, for he believed his empire mirrored the order of the cosmos itself. Yet his people, bound to patterns beyond their grasp, starved while he mapped eternity in the stars. Perhaps most haunting of all was the king obsessed with decay. Unlike others who fled from death, he embraced its slow unraveling. He ordered that food be left to rot in his presence, that garments be worn until they disintegrated, that palaces crumble without repair. He claimed that only in decay could truth be glimpsed, that beauty lay in the inevitable collapse of all things. His court reeked of mold and dust, walls streaked with damp, halls filled with the whisper of crumbling stone. Yet he sat in rapture, eyes fixed on the slow dance of disintegration, convinced that he alone understood the secret rhythm of existence. His people lived among ruins not because they had fallen, but because their ruler worshipped the fall itself. Through each of these visions, obsession twisted into destiny. Weight became law, circles became ritual, vibrations became prophecies, stars became rulers, decay became truth. These kings remind us how fragile the line between vision and nightmare truly is, how swiftly a sovereign's fixation can unravel the fabric of reality. And yet the path forward promises even stranger tales, obsessions so consuming that they dissolve not only empires, but the very memory of those who bore them, leaving behind only whispers and ruins. One monarch surrendered himself to the worship of breath. He believed that each inhalation contained fragments of the divine, and so he commanded his subjects to measure every breath aloud. In markets, farmers counted softly as they exhaled. In temples, priests chanted the rhythm of lungs. In palaces, courtiers gasped in unison like an orchestra of air. The king himself was surrounded by attendants who marked his every inhalation on scrolls, convinced that by preserving this rhythm, he could extend his life indefinitely. But the empire faltered beneath the weight of his fixation. Labor slowed as workers paused to chant. Harvests spoiled while peasants measured their breathing, and the simple act of living became a ritual of suffocation. Another sovereign became enthralled by mirrors of metal. He ordered shields polished until they gleamed brighter than the sun, and entire cities covered in reflective panels. He declared that no enemy could approach if blinded by brilliance, and so armies marched not with weapons, but with polished discs raised to the sky. His capital shone like a second sun, dazzling travelers for miles, but within its walls heat grew unbearable. Crops withered under relentless glare, and water boiled in shallow pools. The city itself became a furnace of light, a place where reflection replaced substance, and the king ruled not over men, but over his own blinding illusions. Elsewhere, a ruler obsessed with ascent built towers that reached beyond reason. He decreed that each new structure must surpass the last, stretching ever closer to the heavens. Villages emptied as laborers were forced into endless construction, their lives consumed in mortar and stone. The towers rose, swaying in the wind, their peaks vanishing into clouds, but they stood hollow, staircases winding upward to nowhere. From his throne, the king gazed at these skeletal monuments, convinced that when they pierced the sky itself, he would ascend with them into eternity. Yet storms shattered the highest spires. Earthquakes split their bases, and the kingdom crumbled beneath the endless hunger for height. Another tale speaks of a monarch who devoted himself to silence not of sound but of speech. He outlawed words altogether, claiming that language corrupted truth. His subjects were forced to communicate with gestures, symbols carved into the air, glances that carried fragile meaning. The kingdom became a pantomime, a vast stage where actors performed without voice, while the king sat in ecstasy at the stillness of tongues. Yet commerce collapsed without contracts, law withered without testimony, and families fractured without speech. What began as devotion to purity dissolved into chaos, a world where silence became the loudest tyranny of all. But stranger still was the king who adored illusions of light. He surrounded himself with crystals and lenses, bending sunbeams into shifting rainbows across his palace walls. He believed the refractions carried messages from realms unseen, and he spent hours tracing their patterns, convinced they foretold destiny. Courtiers stood in chambers flooded with color, their faces bathed in fractured light, unable to distinguish reality from spectacle. His empire turned into a prism, each moment split into fragments, every truth scattered into endless interpretations. The kingdom itself shimmered like a hallucination, dazzling yet unstable, ready to dissolve at the slightest change of light. Through each of these tales, we glimpse how obsession twists rulers into architects of unreality. Breath transformed into ritual, metal into blindness, towers into futile striving, silence into desolation, light into deception. Each fixation promised transcendence but delivered ruin, reshaping entire civilizations into dreamscapes that consume themselves. And yet, even deeper stories lie hidden, whispers of rulers whose compulsions were so vast that they swallowed not only their empires but the very fabric of memory, leaving behind nothing but haunting echoes. There was once a monarch who sought to erase the boundary between himself and the animal kingdom. He believed that humanity was a mistake, a divergence from purity, and so he ordered that his body be reshaped to resemble beasts he worshipped. Horns of ivory were fastened to his crown, his teeth filed into points, his nails grown and gilded like claws. He paraded through his palace clad in furs stitched from hundreds of creatures, while attendants crawled beside him on all fours, imitating wolves and lions. The court became a menagerie of human-animal hybrids, rituals performed in howls, feasts eaten raw, laws declared through snarls and growls. To his people, he seemed less a man than a living nightmare, and yet he proclaimed himself closer to the gods than any mortal had ever been. In another kingdom, a ruler gave his devotion to fireflies. He ordered forests cleared so that these insects might thrive, their glow harvested as if it were a divine flame. Entire palaces were lit not by torches, but by jars of swarming light, corridors shimmering with 1,000 flickering sparks. He believed the fireflies carried the souls of ancestors, their glow a signal of eternal presence. Nights became dazzling spectacles, the kingdom glowing like a constellation fallen to earth. But as the obsession deepened, crops failed under forced cultivation of the insects, and famine spread beneath the glitter. His empire became a beacon of beauty that blinded itself into ruin. Elsewhere, chronicles tell of a sovereign enthralled by whispers. He commanded that no voice be raised above a murmur, that even proclamations of law be delivered in hushed tones. Courtiers bent forward to catch fragments of sound, ministers strained to hear orders, while citizens passed decrees as secrets muttered from ear to ear. Markets buzzed like hives of subdued voices. Temples echoed with subdued prayers. The king himself sat in darkened halls, listening to the faintest sounds as if they held divine truth. Yet in a land ruled by whispers, truth fractured, rumors flourished, and trust dissolved. The kingdom collapsed, not with screams but with the soft erosion of certainty. Another sovereign gave his heart to glass not as reflection but as fragility. He believed that strength was a lie, and only vulnerability was divine. His palaces were built of paper-thin crystal, shattering at the slightest tremor, rebuilt endlessly at unbearable cost. He walked barefoot upon glass floors, his skin sliced with each step, blood mingling with shards as sacred offerings. His empire lived in constant dread, every gust of wind threatening collapse, every footfall echoing fragility. To him, this was holiness, a kingdom forever on the edge of breaking, suspended in the beauty of imminent ruin. But perhaps most chilling was the monarch who worshipped emptiness. He declared that nothingness was the highest form of perfection, and he set about erasing his world. Statues were dismantled, palaces leveled, temples reduced to dust. He commanded that books be burned, art destroyed, music silenced, until his realm stood as a vast desert of absence. Yet he reveled in the void, proclaiming that only by stripping the world bare could truth be found. His subjects wandered through landscapes of desolation, where silence weighed heavier than stone, where the absence of memory was the only inheritance left to them. These rulers, each lost in visions beyond reason, reveal how obsession corrodes the very essence of life. Beast worship dissolved humanity. Fireflies consumed harvests. Whispers bred lies. Glass enshrined fragility. Emptiness devoured culture. In every case, what began as devotion ended as destruction. Hallucinations painted upon the canvas of reality until nothing solid remained. And as the tales draw nearer to their end, they seem to spiral ever deeper into unreality, as though history itself bends beneath the gravity of these obsessions. Among the most unsettling rulers was one who devoted himself to silence not of words or sound, but of thought. He became convinced that the human mind itself was dangerous, that imagination was a toxin infecting his empire. To cure it, he demanded rituals that emptied consciousness. Citizens were ordered to sit for hours, staring at blank walls, their thoughts scoured clean by repetition and fatigue. Schools abandoned teaching, poets vanished, stories were outlawed, ministers delivered decrees stripped of metaphor, reduced to blunt orders. The king himself wore a crown with spikes pressed inward, a reminder that thought was pain. His kingdom became a void where dreams withered, a place where life unfolded without memory, without vision, without hope. Elsewhere, chronicles whisper of a monarch who surrendered to insects. He declared them divine architects, more disciplined than men, and reshaped his empire in their image. Cities were rebuilt as hives, streets as tunnels, palaces as nests of intricate hexagons. His soldiers marched in patterns mimicking ants, his citizens fed from communal stores, individuality erased in favor of collective obedience. Swarms of locusts were bred as sacred guardians, their buzzing a constant hymn. To live under his rule was to feel yourself absorbed into a hive mind, no longer a person but a fragment of a colony. All thought bent to the will of a sovereign who believed himself the insect king. Another tale recalls the sovereign, entranced by mirrors of the night sky. He lined his halls with black marbles speckled in gold, creating chambers that shimmered like constellations. He walked barefoot across floors that appeared as galaxies, declaring himself the center of the cosmos. He demanded that his people erase their names and instead adopt those of stars, reordering families into constellations, weaving human lives into celestial charts. Marriages, births, even deaths were dictated by stellar patterns until the kingdom itself resembled a map of the heavens etched upon earth. Yet as the sky shifted, so too did his decrees, and his subjects lived in chaos, tethered to the whims of stars that cared nothing for their suffering. There was also the king who adored mirrors not for reflection or illusion, but for multiplication. He believed that oneself was insufficient, that divinity required infinite forms, so he ordered artisans to create thousands of effigies, wax bodies molded in his likeness, clothed in his robes, perfumed with his scent, palaces filled with silent doubles, corridors lined with replicas, streets patrolled by statues that mimicked his posture. His subjects bowed in confusion, never knowing which figure concealed the living sovereign. For him, it was ecstasy. He was everywhere and nowhere, immortal through replication. But his people lived in dread, unable to distinguish truth from artifice, their lives shadowed by endless duplicates of one man's face. Perhaps the most haunting was the monarch who sought to command memory itself. He decreed that history be rewritten daily, that every chronicle be erased and replaced with new versions of the past. Scribes worked without end, reshaping time according to his mood, erasing victories one day, inventing disasters the next. Citizens woke to find their ancestors transformed, their traditions rewritten, their very lives altered by decree. Memory became liquid, truth dissolved, and the past itself grew unstable. He believed this gave him ultimate power, for if he controlled what had been, he ruled also what was and what would come. Yet, in his hunger for mastery, he obliterated the anchor of reality, leaving a people adrift in seas of false remembrance. These obsessions revealed the final descent of sovereignty into delirium. Thought erased, individuality dissolved, stars mistaken for destiny, selves multiplied into infinity, memory corrupted into fiction. Each kingdom became a hallucination given form, each ruler a dreamer sculpting reality into fragments. And yet, as strange as these tales are, the chronicles insist darker visions still lie ahead, kings whose compulsions transcended even ruin, devouring not only empires, but the very essence of existence. One sovereign became consumed by the ocean's depths. He believed the seafloor held secrets that no god dared reveal, and so he built colossal glass spheres lowered into the waves, dragging his court beneath the surface. Ministers debated policy while fish drifted past. Servants served meals as currents rattled the walls, and priests proclaimed omens from the movements of kelp. The king himself spent hours staring into the dark abyss, convinced that shadows in the deep whispered truths too ancient for land. Yet storms shattered domes, floods devoured chambers, and the empire drowned beneath his fixation, leaving behind ruins swallowed by the tide. Another tale tells of a monarch enthralled by endless ascent within himself. He demanded staircases that spiraled higher and higher without reaching an end. Entire palaces became vertical labyrinths, with steps rising into clouds of incense and smoke. Courtiers climbed for days to glimpse him, their legs trembling, their breath broken, only to find the king seated on a throne of stone at some dizzying height. He declared that those who could not reach him were unworthy, their weakness proof of betrayal. Yet his people lived and died upon the stairs, generations climbing without ever arriving, prisoners in an empire of feudal striving. In another land, a ruler surrendered to sand. He ordered deserts, cultivated like gardens, dunes shaped by armies into shifting sculptures. Palaces were half buried beneath drifts, festivals held among wind-carved towers, and maps redrawn daily as landscapes moved with storms. He declared that permanence was a lie, that only shifting sands revealed truth. His empire lived in impermanence, rebuilding ceaselessly as dunes devoured cities. Yet to him, the endless erosion was divine, proof that all things bowed before the desert's hand. His kingdom became a mirage, shimmering but unstable, dissolving with every gust of wind. Another sovereign fell captive to echoes of the body itself. He ordered that every heartbeat in his court be recorded, every pulse counted, every rhythm preserved. He surrounded himself with drums that mimicked the throb of veins, walls that vibrated with the cadence of life. To him, the kingdom was a living organism, each subject a cell, each beat a fragment of eternity. But his obsession turned monstrous. Those whose hearts faltered were declared traitors, executed for betraying the rhythm of the realm. The empire became a macabre orchestra, pulsing in forced unison until fear silenced even the natural beat of life. But perhaps most terrifying was the king, obsessed with absence of form. He believed that shapes themselves corrupted truth, and so he outlawed geometry. Squares, circles, lines, all were forbidden, razed from temples, erased from art, burned from books. His cities dissolved into chaos, structures collapsing without plan, streets curving into nowhere. Yet he rejoiced, declaring that the formless was purity, that the collapse of shape revealed the raw essence of being. His empire rotted into ruins of fragments, places where no angle aligned, no pattern endured, a labyrinth not of intention but of collapse. Still, he smiled, proclaiming that only destruction could reveal eternity. These obsessions, more grotesque than those before, marked the final descent into hallucination. Oceans mistaken for oracles, staircases for salvation, sands for eternity, heartbeats for loyalty, formlessness for truth. With each tale, the line between history and nightmare dissolves further, until the kings themselves become myths of obsession, remembered not for their reigns, but for the worlds they dragged into delirium. And yet one last chapter remains, where the chronicles whisper of rulers whose visions were so consuming that they devoured even memory itself, leaving behind only the hollow echo of madness. In the last of the Chronicles, there is mention of a monarch who sought to erase the boundary between dream and waking. He declared that sleep was not rest but a gateway, and so he commanded his entire realm to slumber according to his visions. Bells rang at unpredictable hours, forcing citizens into sudden sleep, only to be roused again at his whim. Temples were transformed into vast dormitories, streets lined with bodies drifting in and out of dreams. The king wandered among them, convinced that by weaving their unconscious thoughts together, he could sculpt a collective paradise. Yet what emerged was not heaven but delirium, a society trapped in half-remembered visions, unable to distinguish dawn from dusk, truth from hallucination. Elsewhere, another ruler surrendered to silence so absolute that he erased even the sound of nature. He ordered forests cut down to still the wind, rivers diverted to stop their flow, animals hunted into extinction so their cries would not disturb his peace. His kingdom became barren, stripped of voice, a wasteland where even the rustle of leaves was gone. The people whispered that they no longer dreamed, that the silence had seeped into their very bones, hollowing them from within. To the king it was perfection, a realm of eternal quiet, unmarred by interruption. Yet in his obsession he silenced not only the world but the very pulse of life itself, leaving behind nothing but stillness. Another tale speaks of the monarch who adored reflection not of water, glass, or metal, but of memory itself. He demanded that every day be reenacted, that every gesture, every word, every breath be repeated endlessly. Families were forced to mimic their lives, playing out yesterday's meals, yesterday's arguments, yesterday's laughter. The kingdom became a theater of repetition, a vast stage where no new act was ever allowed. To him, this was immortality, time frozen, the past replayed eternally. Yet the people withered beneath the weight of monotony, their lives devoured by the endless echo of days that no longer existed. There was also the sovereign who became obsessed with disappearance. He commanded that cities be abandoned without a trace, their walls dismantled stone by stone, their names erased from every record. Villages vanished overnight, swallowed by forests or deserts, their memory forbidden. He believed that erasure was salvation, that by vanishing he could outwit mortality. He himself vanished at last, leaving behind no body, no tomb, no name inscribed upon stone. His empire dissolved into absence, remembered only by the fear he inspired, a ghost king who ruled not through presence but through deliberate obliteration. And finally, the chronicles speak of the king who sought to dissolve even existence. He declared that the world itself was illusion, a dream he alone could end. He ordered the destruction of monuments, the burning of libraries, the scattering of ashes into the wind. He proclaimed that history was a lie, that reality was a fragile mask, and that by tearing it away he could reveal the void beneath. His people lived in terror, uncertain if the next day would arrive, uncertain if they themselves were real. And when he vanished, it was as if the world had exhaled, yet something of his vision lingered, a shadow whispering that perhaps he had been right, that perhaps all of this was only a dream. Thus the chronicles close, not with triumph but with dissolution. The kings of obsession carved their visions into the bones of the world, twisting empires into reflections of their fixations. Some sought eternity in mirrors, others in silence, others in decay, but all were devoured by the very compulsions they worshipped. What remains are ruins and whispers, fragments of dreams that once reshaped reality. And as we read their tales, we are left with a lingering unease, a question that trembles like a half-remembered vision. Were these rulers mad, or did they glimpse a truth too unbearable to face?